Okay, it's part 2 of chapter 6, picking up on page 172. The Navy SEALs can deal with that. We can deal with any enemy, but not if someone wants to put us in jail back home in the USA, and we sure as hell don't want to hang around the mountains waiting for someone to cut our throats, unable to fight back just in case he might be classified as an unarmed Afghan farmer. But these are problems of the modern U.S. combat soldier, the constant worry about overstepping the mark, and an American media that delights in trying to knock us down, which we have done nothing to deserve, except perhaps love our country and everything it stands for. In the early weeks of our duties in Afghanistan, the fight went on. Platoons of us went out night after night trying to halt the insurgents creeping through the mountain passes. Every time there was a full moon, we launched operations, because that was really the only time we could get a sweep of light over the dark mountains. Following this lunar cycle, we'd send the helicopters up there to watch for the bearded fanatics squirting over the border in Afghanistan, and then we'd round them up, the helos driving them like sheepdogs, watching them run for their lives, straight toward us and the rest of the waiting U.S. troops for capture and interrogation. I realize it might seem strange that an underwater specialist from SDV Team 1 should be groping around 9,000 feet above sea level. It is generally accepted in the Navy that the Swimmer Delivery Vehicle, SDV, the mini-submarine that brings us into our ops area, is the stealthiest vehicle in the world, and it follows that the troops manning the world's stealthiest vehicle are the world's sneakiest guys. That's us, operating deep behind enemy lines, observing and reporting unnoticed, living on the edge of our nerves. Our principal task is always to find the target and then call in the direct action guys. That's really what everyone wants to do, direct action, but it can't be done without the deadly business we conduct up in those lonely peaks of the Hindu Kush. Lieutenant Commander Eric Christensen was always aware of our value, and in fact was a very good friend of mine. He used to name the operations for me. I was a Texan, which, being as he was a Virginia gentleman, somehow amused the life out of him. He thought I was some kind of cross between Billy the Kid and Buffalo Bill, quick on the draw and dang my britches. Never mind, both of those cowboys were from way north of me, Kansas or somewhere. So far as Eric was concerned, Texas and all points west and north of it represented the Badlands, lawless frontiers, Colt 44s, cattlemen, and Red Indians. Thus we were always flying on Operation Longhorn or Operation Lone Star. Naming the ops for us Texas boy really broke him up. The vast majority of our missions were very quiet and involved strict surveillance of the mountain passes or villages. We were always trying to avoid gunfire as we photographed and then swooped on our target. Invariably, we were looking for the misfit, the one man in the village who did not fit in, the hitman of the Taliban, who was plainly not a farmer. Sometimes we'd run across a group of these guys sitting around a campfire, bearded, sullen, drinking coffee, their AK-47s at ready. Our first task was to identify them. Were they Pashtuns, peaceable shepherds, goatherds, or armed warriors of the Taliban, the ferocious mountain men who'd slit your throat as soon as look at you? It took only a few days to work out the Taliban fighters were nothing like so rough and dirty as the Afghan mountain peasants. Most of them had been educated in America, and here they were, carefully cleaning their AK-47s, getting ready to kill us. And it did not take us much longer to realize how impressive they could be in action up here on their home ground. I always thought they would turn and run for it when we discovered them, but they did nothing of the kind. If they held or could reach the high ground, they would stand and fight. If we came down to them and usually either give up or head right back to the border into Pakistan, where we could not follow them. But close to you, you could always see the defiance in their eyes, that hatred of America, the fire of the revolutionary that burned in their souls. It was pretty damn creepy for us, because this was the heartland of terror, the place where the destruction of the World Trade Center was born and nourished, perfected by men such as these. I'll be honest, it seemed kind of unreal and not possible, but we all knew that it had happened. Right here, in this remote dust bowl, was the root of it all, the homeland of bin Laden's fighters, the place where they still plot and scheme to smash the United States, the place where the loathing of Uncle Sam is so ingrained, a brand of evil flourishes that is beyond understanding of most Westerners, mostly because it belongs to a different, more barbaric century. And here stood Mikey, Shane, Axe, me, and the rest, ready to face off any time against these silent, sure-footed warriors, masters of the mountain, deadly with a rifle and tribal knife. To meet these guys in these remote Pashtun villages only made the conundrum more difficult, because right here we're talking primitive with a big P, adobe huts made out of sun-clay bricks with dirt floors and an awful smell of urine and mule dung. Downstairs they have their goats and chickens living in the house, and yet here, in these caveman conditions, they planned and carried out the most shocking atrocity on the 21st century city. Sanitation in the villages is rudimentary as it gets. They have a communal head, kind of a pit, out on the edge of the houses, and we were all warned to watch out for them, particularly on night patrols. I misjudged it one night, slipped, and got a foot in there. That caused huge laughter up there in the dead of the night, everyone trying not to explode. Wasn't funny to me, however. The next week it was much worse. We were all in the pitch dark, creeping through this very rough ground, trying to set up a surveillance point above a very small cluster of huts and goats. We could not see a thing without NGVs, night vision goggles, and suddenly I slipped into a gaping hole. I dared not yell, but I knew I was on my way down, and I shuddered to think where I was going to land. I just rammed my right arm rigid straight up and held tight on my rifle, and crashed straight into the village head. I went right under, vaguely hearing my teammates hiss, "Look out, Luttrell just found the shitter again." Never has there been that much suppressed laughter on an Afghan mission, but it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I could have given typhoid to the entire Bagram base. I was freezing cold, but I cheerfully jumped into a river full of combat gear just to get washed off. Sometimes there was real trouble on those border checkpoints, and we occasionally had to load up the Humvees and transport about 18 guys out and then walk for miles. The problem was the Pakistani government has obvious sympathy with the Taliban, and as a result leaves the border area in the northeast uncontrolled. Pakistan has decreed its authority can operate on tarmac roads and then for 20 meters on either side of that road. Beyond that, anything goes. So the Taliban fighters simply swerve off the road and enter Afghanistan over the ancient pathways. They come and go as they please, and they always have, unless we prevent them. Many of them only want to come in and rustle cattle, which we do not bother with. However, the Taliban know this, and they move around disguised as cattle farmers, and we certainly do bother with that. And those little camel trains laden with high explosives, they really get our attention. And every single time we come under attack, the slightest noise, any betrayal of our position, someone would open fire on us, often from the Pakistan side of the border, where we could not go. So we moved stealthily, gathered our photographs, grabbed our ringleaders, stayed in touch with the base, and whistled up reinforcements wherever we needed help. It was considered the opinion of our commanders that the key to winning this was intel, identifying the bomb makers, finding their supplies, and smashing the Taliban arsenal before they could use it. But it was never easy. Our enemy was brutal, implacable, and no discernible concern about time or life, as long as it takes, was their obvious belief. And in the end, they assumed they will rid their holy Muslim soil of the infidel invaders. After all, they always have, right? Sorry, not yet. Sometimes we had the head sheds, that's SEAL vernacular for senior commanders. Were studying a specific target. We were kept on hold. I volunteered my spare time working in Bagram Hospital, mostly in the emergency room, helping with the wounded guys and trying to become a better medic for my team. And that hospital was a real eye-opener, because we were happy to treat Afghans as well as our own military personnel. And they showed up at the emergency room with every kind of wound, mostly bullets, occasionally stabbing. That's one of the real problems in that country. Everyone has a gun. There seems to be an AK-47 in every living room. And there was a lot of injuries. Afghan civilians would show up at the main gate so badly shot we'd send them out Humvees to bring them into the ER. We treated anyone who came at the American taxpayers' expense, and we gave everyone as good care as we could. Bagram was an excellent place for me to improve my skills, and I hoped I was doing some good at the same time. I was, of course, unpaid for this work, but medicine has always been a vocation for me, and those long hours in the hospital were priceless to a doctor I hope to one day be. And while I attended to the sick and injured, the never-ending work of the commanders continued, filtering the intel reports, checking the CIA reports, trying to identify the Taliban leaders so we could cut off the heads of their operations. There was always a very big list of potential targets, some more advanced than others. But by that I mean certain communities where really dangerous guys had been located, identified, and pinpointed by satellites or by us. It was work that required immense perseverance and the ability to assess the likelihood of actually finding the guy who mattered. The teams in Bagram were prepared to go out there and conduct this very dangerous work, but no one likes going on a series of wild goose chases where the chances of finding the top Taliban terrorists are remote. And of course, the intel guys have to be aware at all times that nothing is static up here in these mountains. Those Taliban guys were very mobile and very smart. They know a lot, but not all there is to know about American capability, and they surely understand the merit of keeping it moving from village to village, cave to cave, never remaining in one place long enough to get caught with their stockpiles of high explosives. Our senior chief, Dan Healy, was outstanding at seeking out and finding good jobs for us, ones where we had a better than average chance of finding our quarry. He spent hours poring over those lists, checking out certain known terrorists, where he spent his time, where he was last seen. Chief Healy would comb through the photographic evidence, checking maps, charts, working out the places we had a real chance of victory, grabbing the main man without fighting an all-out street battle. He had a personal short list of the prime suspect and where to find them. By June, he had a lot of records, the various methods used by the Kingpin Taliban guys and their approximate access to TNT. The one man's name popped right out at him. For security reasons, I'm going to call him Ben Sharmak. And suffice to say, he's a leader of a serious Taliban force, a sinister mountain man known to make forays into the cities and also known to have been directly responsible for several lethal attacks on U.S. Marines, always with bombs. Sharmak was a shadowy figure of around 40. He commanded maybe 140 to 150 armed fighters, but he was an educated man, trained in military tactics, and able to speak 5 languages. He was also known to be one of Osama bin Laden's closest associates. He kept his troops mobile, moving into or camping on the outskirts of friendly Pashtun villages, accepting hospitality and then traveling to the next rendezvous, recruiting all the way. These mountain men were unbelievably difficult to trace, but they needed rest, to eat and drink, and perhaps even wash, and they need village communities to do all of that. Almost every morning, Chief Healy would run the main list of potential targets past Mikey, our team officer, and me. He usually gave us papers with a list of maybe 20 names and possible locations, and we made short lists of the guys we considered we should go after. We thus created Rogues Gallery and made our mission choices depending on the amount of intel we had. The name Ben Sharmak kept on showing up, and the estimates of his force size kept going up just as often. Finally, there was a tentative briefing about possible Operation Red Wing, which involved the capture or killing of this highly dangerous character, but he was always elusive. First he was here, then there, like a freaking Scarlet Pimpernel. And the photos available were just head and shoulders, not great quality, and very grainy. Still, we knew approximately what the son of a bitch looked like, and on the face of it, it was stacking up to be like any other SR operation. Get the above target, stalk him, photograph him, and if all possible, grab him. We had very decent intel on him, which suggested the CIA and probably the FBI were also extremely interested in his capture or death. And various briefings went on. Ben Sharmak seemed to get progressively more important. There were now reports of around 80 troop minimum and 200 troop maximum in this army, and this constituted a very big operation. And Chief Healy decreed that me and my 3 buddies in Alpha Platoon were the precise guys to carry it out. We were not expected to take this large bunch of wild-eyed killers. Indeed, we were expected to stay quieter than we had ever been in our lives. Just find this bastard, nail him down, his location, troop strength, then radio in for direct action force to come in by air and take him down. Simple, right? If he thought he might be preparing an immediate evacuation of the village in which he resided, then we would take him forthwith. That would be me or Axe. The chances were I'd get to only one shot at Sharmak. Just one time I could trap him in the crosshairs and squeeze the trigger, probably from hundreds of yards away. I knew only one thing: I'd better not miss, because the apparitions of Webb and Davis, not to mention every other serving SEAL, would surely rise up and tear my ass off. This was, after all, precisely what they had trained me for. In case anyone's wondering, I had absolutely no qualms about putting a bullet straight through this bastard's head. He was a fanatical, sworn enemy of the United States of America, who had already murdered many of my colleagues in the U.S. Marines. He was also the kind of terrorist who would like nothing better than to mastermind a new attack on the U.S. mainland. If I got shot, he'd get no mercy from me. I knew what was expected of me. I knew the team boss wanted this character eliminated, and when I thought about it, I was damn proud they considered me and my buddies the men for the job. As ever, we would do everything possible not to let anyone down. Every day we checked the intel office to see what further data there was on Sharmak. Chief Healy was right on the case, working with the ops officer and our skipper, Commander Pirro. The problem was always the same: where was our target? He was worse than Saddam Hussein, disappearing, evading the prying eyes of satellites, keeping his identity and location secret even from the many CIA informers who were close to him. There was, of course, no point in charging the mountains armed to the teeth with weapons and cameras unless we were absolutely sure of his whereabouts. The Taliban were a serious threat to low-flying military aircrafts, and the helo pilots knew they were in constant danger of being fired upon, even on night ops. These mountain men were handy with missile launchers, as they were with AK-47s. There was a huge amount of backup required for any such operation: transportation, communication, available air support, not to mention ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, hand grenades, and weapons, all of which we would carry with us. At one point, quite early on, we had a very definite Red Wing is a go, and preparations were underway when the entire thing was suddenly called off. Turn 1. They'd lost him again. They had data, and they had reason to believe they knew where he was, but nothing hard. The guys in Intel studied the maps and the terrain, ringed the probability areas, made estimates and guesstimates. They thought they had him pinned down, but not sufficiently narrowly to place him in an actual village or a camp, never mind with the accuracy required for a sniper to get off a shot. Intel was just waiting for a break. Meanwhile, me and the guys were out on other SR missions, probably Operation Goat Rope or something. We had just come back from one of these when we heard there'd been a break in the hunt for Ben Sharmack. It was very sudden, and we guessed one of our sources had come up with something. Chief Healy had maps and studies of the terrains underway, and it looked like we were going straight out again. We were called in for a briefing. Lieutenant Mike Murphy, Petty Officer Matthew Axelson, Petty Officer Shane Patton, and I. We listened to the data and the requirements and still regarded it as just another op. But at the last minute there was a big change. They decided Shane would be replaced by a Petty Officer Danny Dietz, a 34-year-old I had known well for years. Danny was a short, well, compared to me, very muscular guy from Colorado. He had lived with his spectacularly beautiful wife, Maria, known to all of us as Patsy, just outside the base in Virginia Beach. They had no children but 2 dogs, both of them damn near as tough as he was, an English bulldog and a bull mastiff. Danny was with me on SDV school in Panama City, Florida. We were both there on 9/11. He was heavily into yoga and martial arts and was a very close friend of Shane's. Guess those beach gods and mystic Iron Men have stuff in common. I was glad to have Danny on the team. He was a little reserved, but underneath he could be very funny and a sweet-natured person. It was not a great plan to upset him, though. Danny Dietz was a caged tiger and a great Navy SEAL. Now, it seemed Red Wing was again given the green light. The 4-man team was nailed down. 2 snipers would be Axe and me, 2 spotters, Mikey and Danny. Command control, Mikey. Communications, Danny and me. The final shoot on target, me or Axe, either one of us spotting, whichever way it fell on the terrain. The plan was to sit up there and high above the place where we believed Sharmack was resident, if necessary, for 4 days. Probably not able to move more than a foot, remaining deadly still in a deadly place, high in the hills. At no time would we be anything but carefully concealed, watching these heavily armed mountain men, who were lifelong experts on the local terrain, awaiting our chance to gun down their leader. It doesn't get a whole lot more dangerous than that. We were actually in a helicopter, dressed and organized, ready to leave Red Wing as a go, when the mission was called off again. Turn 2. It was not so much that we'd lost track of Sharmack as the fact that the slippery little son of a gun had turned up somewhere else. We disembarked and wandered back to our quarters. We shed our heavy packs and weapons and changed out of our combat gear, cleaned the camouflage cream off our faces, and rejoined the human race. The break lasted for 2 weeks, during which time we did a couple minor missions up in the passes and nearly got our heads blown off at least twice. I surpassed myself once by nailing down one of the most dangerous terrorists in northeast Afghanistan. I had Poseidon, and I actually saw him on a break for it on his own, riding a frickin' bicycle along the track. I didn't shoot him because I did not wish to betray our position by opening fire or even moving. We were expecting his complete camel train of high explosives to be moving along this route any time. We wanted both him and his munitions. At least I didn't emulate the actions of a former colleague who, according to SEAL folklore, fired up the direct link and advised a cruising U.S. fighter bomber of GPS position. Then he watched a 500-pound bomb demolish the terrorist, his camel, and everything within 50 yards of him. On this mission, we halted the camel train and managed to capture the terrorist and unload the explosive without resorting to such wild and woolly action. Sorry, lefties, but, like we say back home in Texas, a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. So the days passed by until Monday morning, June 27th, 2005, they located Sharmak again. This time, it looked really good. By noon, the detailed maps and photos of the terrain were spread out before us. The intel was excellent. The maps were bad, the photographs and the terrain passable. We still didn't have a decent picture of Sharmak, just the same old head and shoulder, grainy, indistinct. But we located other killers up here with a lot less, and there was no doubt this time, Red Wing is a go. Right after the briefing, Chief Dan Healy said to me quietly, "This is it, Marcus. We're going. Get the guys ready." I gave the crisp reply expected from a team leader of SEAL CPO. "Okay, Chief, we're out of here." And I walked out of the briefing room and headed back to our quarters with a lot on my mind. I can't quite explain it, but I was assailed by doubts. That feeling of disquiet never left me. I'd seen the maps and they were clear. What I couldn't see was a place to hide. We did not have good intel on the vegetation. It was obviously bad and barren up there in the Hindu Kush, around 10,000 feet. You don't need to be a fellow of the Royal Geographic Institute to know that this arid country above the tree line, not much growing. Great for climbers and a goddamn nightmare for us. The village we were surveying had 32 houses. I counted them in the satellite picture, but we did not know which one Sharmak was in. Neither did we know if the houses were numbered in case we got better intel while we were up there. So we had some pictures of the layout with very little surrounding country. We had good GPS numbers, very accurate. We had a short list of possible landing zones, unnecessary for the insert, because we fast rope in, but critical for the extract. I was certain we'd need to blow down a few trees on the lower level of the mountain in order to have cover when we left and to bring the helicopters in for the DA force if it was required. Barren, treeless mountainscapes, there was no place to conduct secretive landings and takeoff, not with the Taliban rocket men all around, especially the highly trained group that surrounded Sharmak. He was a goddamn lethal, and he proved it more than once, blowing up the Marines. The one aspect of the mission that dominated my thoughts as I walked back to meet the guys was there was no place to hide, no place from which to watch. You simply cannot do effective reconnaissance if you can't get in a good position. And if those mountain cliffs that surrounded the village were as rough and stony as I suspected, we'd stick out on those heights like a diamond in a goat's ass. And there was likely to be 80 and 200 armed warriors keeping a very careful lookout on all the land around their boss. I was worried about the numbers of not about the numbers of our enemy, but about the problems of staying concealed in order to complete the mission. If there was a very limited selection of hiding places, we might have to compromise our angle on the village, not to mention our distance from it. I met Mikey back at the bee hut. I told him we were going in, showed him the maps and what photographs we had, and I remembered his reply. "Beautiful. Just another 3 days of fun and sun." But I saw his expression change as he looked at the pictures, and obviously very steep gradients, truly horrible terrain. In a mountain, he would have to climb up and down in order to find cover. By this time, Axe and Danny appeared. We briefed them and wondered, a bit apprehensively, over at the chow hall for lunch. I had a large bowl of spaghetti. Right afterwards, we went back and dressed and got organized. I wore my desert bottoms and woodland top, mostly because the intel had been a landing zone was fairly green, and we would drop into areas of trees. I also had a sniper hood. Mikey and Danny had their M4 rifles plus grenades. Axe had a Mark 12 .556 caliber rifle, and I had one as well. We all carried the Sig Sauer 9mm pistol. We elected not to take the heavy weapon, the big 120-pound machine gun M60 plus its ammunitions. We were already loaded down with gear, and we thought it might be too heavy to haul up those cliffs. I also took a couple claymores, which are kind of high explosive devices with a tripwire, to keep any intruder from walking up on us. I learned a hard lesson about that on my first day, when 2 Afghans got a lot closer than they should have and might easily have finished me. We took a big roll of detonator cord to blow the trees for incoming landing zone when the mission was complete, for an insert of direct action force. At the last moment, still worried about the entire venture, I grabbed 3 extra magazines, which gave me a total of 11, each holding 30 rounds. 80 was standard, but there was something about Operation Red Wing. It turned out everyone felt the same. We all took 3 extra magazines. I also carried an ISLID, an acronym for Image Stabilization and Light Distribution Unit, for guiding any incoming helo, plus a spotting scope and spare batteries for everything. Danny had the radio, and Mikey and Axe had the camera and computers. We took packed MREs, beef jerky, chicken noodle, power bars, water, plus peanuts and raisins. The whole thing weighed about 45 pounds, which we considered traveling light. Shane was there to see us away. Bye, dudes. Give 'em hell. All set, we were driven down to the Special Ops helicopter area, waiting to hear if there was a change. There would have been turn 3. Third time, Red Wing had been aborted, but this time there was only Rolex 1 hour, which meant we were going as soon as it was dark. We put down our loads and lay in the runway to wait. I remember it was very cold with snow caps in the not-so-distant mountains. Mikey assured me he had remembered to pack his lucky rock, a sharp-pointed bit of granite which had jabbed into his backside for 3 days on a previous mission, when we were in a precarious hide and none of us could move even an inch. Just in case you need to stick it up your ass, he added, remind you of home. And so we waited in the company of a couple other guys and also going out that night. The Quick Reaction Force, QRF, was going to Asadabad at the same time. We had just done a full photo recon of Asadabad, which they carried with them. The deserted Russian base was still there. Asadabad, the capital of the Kunar province, remained a known dangerous area. It was, of course, where the Afghan Mujahideen had almost totally surrounded the base and then proceeded to slaughter all of the Russian enlisted men. It was the beginning of the end of the Soviets in 1989. Only one range of mountains over the spot we were going. Finally, the rotor blades began to howl in the helos. Apparently, the many moving parts of Operation Red Wing, so susceptible to change, were still in place. The call came through, Red Wing is a go, and we hoisted up our gear and clambered on board the Chinook 47 for the insert, 45 minutes away to the northeast. Guess this fucker Ben Shamrock is still where we think he is, said Mikey. We were joined by 5 other guys going to Asadabad, and the other helo took off first. Then we lifted off the runway, following them over the base and banking around to our correct course. It was dark now, and I spent the time looking at the floor rather than out the window. Every time one of the 4 of us, Mikey, Axe, Danny, and me, made it clear, each in his own way, that we did not have a good feeling about this, and I cannot describe how unusual that was. We go into ops areas full of gung-ho and bravado, the way we were trained. Bring 'em on, we're ready. No SEAL would ever admit to being scared of anything. Even if we were, we would never say it. We open the door and go outside to face the enemy, whatever the hell he might be. Whatever we felt that night, and it was not fear of the enemy, although I recognize it might have been fear of the unknown, because we really were unsure about what we would encounter in the way of terrain. When we reached the ops area, the helicopter made 3 false inserts, several miles apart, coming in very slow and hovering over the places we had no intention of going anywhere near. If the Afghans were watching, they must have been very confused, and we were confused. Going in, pulling out, going back in again, hovering, leaving. I'm damn sure if Shamrock guys were out there, they could not have the slightest clue where we were, if we were, or how to locate us. Finally, we were on the way to a real landing zone. The final call came in. Red Wing is a go. The landing controller was calling the shots. 10 minutes out, 3 minutes out, 1 minute, 30 seconds, let's go. The ramp was down. We were open at the rear. The gunner was ready with the M60 machine gun in case of ambush. It was pitch black outside, no moon. The rotor blades were making the familiar boom, 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 boom on the wind. So far, no one had fired anything at us. The rope snaked from the rear of the aircraft to the ground, positioned expertly so our guns could not get caught as we left. Right now, no one spoke. Loaded with our weapons and gear, we lined up. Danny went first, out into the dark. I followed him, and Mikey, then Axe. Each one of us grabbed the rope and slid down fast, wearing the gloves to avoid the burn. It was a drop of about 20 feet. There was a stiff, biting wind. We hit the deck and spread, moving 20 yards away from one another. It was really cold up there, and the downward gale from the rotors beating at us, whisking up the dust, made it much worse. We did not know if we were being watched by the unseen tribesmen. It was plainly a possibility, out here in this lawless, rebel-held area. We heard the howl of the helicopter's engines increase as it lifted off, and then it clattered away into the darkness, gaining speed and height rapidly as it left this god-forsaken escarpment. We froze into the landscape for 15 minutes of total silence. There was not a movement, not a single communication among us, and there was not a sound on the mountain. This was beyond silence, a stillness beyond this concept of silence. Like being in outer space, way down below us we could see 2 fires, or perhaps lanterns, burning, probably a mile away, goat herds, I hope. Then the 15 minutes passed. To my left was the mountains, a great looming mass sweeping skyward. To my right was a group of huge, thick trees. All around us were low tree stumps and thick foliage. We were way below the place we would ultimately operate, and this was very unnerving, because right here anyone could hide out. We couldn't see a damn thing and had no idea if there was anyone around. 16 years ago, not far away from here, I guess the Russian conscripts sensed something very similar before they slashed their throats. Finally, we climbed to our feet. I walked over to Danny and told him to get the comms up and let the controllers know we were down. Then I walked up the hill where Mikey and Axe had a big rope which had absurdly been cut down and dropped from the helicopter. This was definitely a mistake. The Hilo crew was supposed to have taken the rope with them. God knows what they thought we were going to do with it. I was just glad Mikey had found it. If he hadn't, we'd been left it lying on the ground. It might have easily been found by a wandering tribesman or a farmer, especially if they heard the helicopter come in. That rope might have hung our death knell, signifying, as it surely must, that the American Eagle had landed. We did not have a shovel, and Mikey and Axe had to cover the rope with trees, weeds, and foliage. While they were completing this, I opened up comms on the AC-130 Spectre gunship, which I knew was way up somewhere monitoring us, and I passed my message succinctly. Sniper 2-1, this is Glimmer Tree, preparing to move. Roger that. It was the last time I spoke to them, and now we were assembled for our journey, about 4 miles. Our route was pre-planned along the mountain ridge that stretched into the long right-hand dogleg. Our waypoints were marked on our map, and the GPS numbers detailing the precise position from the satellite were clear, numbered 1, 2, 3. And this was just about the only thing that was straightforward, because the terrain was absolutely horrible. The moonless night was still pitch black, and our route was along a mountain face so steep it was a goddamn miracle we didn't fall off and break our necks. Also, it was raining like a bastard and freezing cold. Within 10 minutes, we were absolutely soaked, like Hell Week. It was really going slow, clambering and slipping, stumbling and looking for footholds, handholds, anything. All of us fell down the mountain in the first half hour. But it was worse for me, because the other 3 were all expert mountain climbers and much smaller and lighter than I was. I was slower over the ground because of my size, and I kept falling behind. They had to rest while I was catching up, and then when I got there, Mikey signaled to go straight. No rest for Marcus. Fuck you, Murphy, I said without a pretense of good nature. In fact, conditions were so bad it was a lousy idea to rest up. You could freeze up here, soaked to the skin as we were, in about 5 minutes. So we kept going, always upward, keeping our body heat as high as possible. But it was still miserable. We never stopped ducking down under trees and hanging limbs, holding on as if we could, trying not to fall off the mountain again. In the end, we reached the top of the cliff face and found a freshly used trail. It was obvious the Taliban had been through here recently in substantial numbers, and it was good news for us. It meant Sharmak and his men could not be far away, and right now we were hunting them. At the top, we suddenly walked into an enormous flat field of very high grass, and the moon came out briefly. The pasture stretched away from us, like some kind of paradise lit up in the pale light. We all stopped in our tracks because it looked amazingly beautiful. But an enemy could easily have been lurking in the grass, and an instant later we ducked down, staying silent. Axe tried to find a path through it, then tried to make his own path, but he simply could not. The pasture was too thick, and it nearly covered him. Before long he returned and told us, poetically, there in the Southeast Asian moonlight, in these ancient storied lands right there on the roofs of the world, guys, that was totally fucking hopeless. To our right was the deep valley, which somewhere down, which was our target village, was located. We already hit waypoint 1, and our only option was to find another trail and keep moving along the flank of the escarpment. And then, very suddenly, a great fog bank rolled in and drifted off the mountaintop beneath us and across the valley. I remember looking down in it, moonlit clouds so white, so pure, it looked as if we could have walked right out into another mountain. Through the nods, night optic device, it was a spectacular sight, a vision perhaps of heaven, set in a land of hellish undercurrents and flaming hatreds. While we stood there, transfixed by our surroundings, Mikey worked out that we were just beyond waypoint 1, and we would still somehow had to proceed to on our northerly course, though not through the high grass. We fanned out, and Danny found a trail that led around the mountain more or less where we wanted to go, but it was not easy, because now the moon had disappeared and it was again raining like hell. We must have gone about another half-mile across the terrain that was just as bad as anything we had encountered all night. Then, unexpectedly, I could smell a house and goat manure, even through the rain, an Afghan farmhouse. We nearly walked straight into the front yard, and now we had to be very careful. We ducked down, crawling on our hands and knees through the thick undergrowth, staying out of sight, right on the escarpment. Miserable as it was, conditions were really perfect for a SEAL operation behind enemy lines. Without night vision goggles like ours, people couldn't possibly see us. The rain and wind certainly driven everyone else under cover, and anyone still awake would probably thought only a raving lunatic could be out here in such weather, and they were right. All four of us had taken quite heavy falls, probably one every 500 yards we traveled. We were covered in mud and as wet as Bud's Phase 2 trainees. It was true, only a lunatic, or a seal, could willingly walk around like this. We could not see much ourselves, nothing except the farmhouse, really. Then, quite suddenly, the moon came out again, very bright, and we had to move swiftly into the shadows, our cover stolen by the pale, luminous light in the sky. We kept moving away from the farmhouse, still upward the mountain, through the quite reasonable vegetation. But then all of my personal dreads came out and whacked us. We walked straight out of the trees into a barren, harsh hillside. The main escarpment sat steeply on the northern rise. There was not a tree, not a bush, just wet shale, mud, small rocks, and boulders. The moon was directly in front of us, casting our long shadows onto the slope. This was my nightmare. Ever since I first stared at those plans back at the briefing room, the four of us, starkly silhouetted against the treeless mountain above the Taliban-occupied village, we were an Afghan's lookout finest moment, unmissable. We were Webb and Davis's worst dream, snipers uncovered, out in the open, trapped in nature's spotlight, and with nowhere to hide. Holy shit, said Mikey.